Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. He's Kevin Quigley. I'm Jarrod Prugar. Kevin, a lot has been made about Mike Yurcich's termination over the course of the last few days. And there's more clarity now for what James Franklin has mentioned, um, both at practice and in his media availability on Monday night, or Monday afternoon, I guess I should say. But at the end of the day, it's up to James Franklin. It's his show, and now they've got to reap the decisions. And if it's good, bad, or indifferent, it can't get much worse than what it was previously. Drew Aller had only thrown for over 300 yards, I believe, in the West Virginia game. Hasn't really come close to that. Now, granted, there were some games that he did not play into the fourth quarter, but at the same time, you've got to get some sort of identity established. And 10 games into the season, and you have no identity, that's not good for an offense.
Yeah, no identity. And from what it sounds like from the Monday press conference is a lot of insubordination on the part of Mike Yurcich. James Franklin, when I think it was Rich Scarcella
Mm-hmm.
of the Reading Eagle, asked James, you mentioned in your Saturday press conference that like you wanted some short, quick throws to get Drew going, and why didn't that happen? And Franklin goes, "We asked, I asked," and it sounds like just answering to or asking nobody, and the doorbell went unanswered, and Yurcich just kind of called what he called, and from what it sounds like all year, there's been game plans that have been come up with, and they've kind of just gone rogue. Yurcich has just kind of gone rogue, or I, it doesn't sound like the cohesion was there between Yurcich and Franklin. Franklin sought Yurcich out. I mean, it's why he fired Soraka after 1 year. It's because he wanted Yurcich. He gets Soraka because Yurcich gets the Texas job, and then all of a sudden, boom, Yurcich is back available, and Franklin fires Soraka after a kind of meh season. So, and the messaging with Franklin since then has been collaboration. He said collaboration twice on Monday. I think he said another 2 or 3 times in the post-practice press conference. Collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. So that tells me Yurcich wasn't listening to him, and Franklin was not happy about it. And now he has a guy, Seider. It's probably Seider, then Howle, just like slightly below him. Seider's been with him since 2018, and it sounds like the image that the offense that Franklin wants to run, they're starting to achieve.
Right, and that's the thing too. The new buzzword is collaboration. And if they weren't collaborating on a game plan, and this move should have been made a lot sooner. This move was made in large part because of Manny Diaz, and I don't mean that because Manny Diaz makes decisions like this. I mean that because James Franklin wanted progress. Manny Diaz made progress. When you look at last year to this year, Michigan and Ohio State, there was progress defensively. Yeah, the game did not result in a win, but it did result in that gap growing closer. And the defense played well enough both games to win the game. Offensively, I think if anything they regressed, and that's an issue. James is notorious for for playing not to lose in big games, but at the same time, if there's no collaboration and there was no mesh offensively from a staff perspective, that's a big issue. That can't happen. Everybody's got to be pulling the same rope, and if everybody's pulling a different rope, then what's the point? And Yurcich's track record, yeah, he came from Shippensburg. Hell yeah, PSAC. OK State. Mike Gundy has done just fine without him. Goes to Ohio State and is the quarterback's coach. Okay, that might be he wore out his welcome. I think at OK State. Then ends up at Texas for a year. Don't really get to see much of him there, and then he ends up at Penn State. So I mean, it's not like he was highly touted, but it wasn't like he was highly exposed, I guess is a good way to put it. But for Yurcich now, I mean, best of luck to him. But for Penn State, they've got to go back to their roots. They've got to have a balanced attack, but they've also got to opponents need to fear Drew Aller. Opponents need to fear his arm. And right now, the way that the offense is set up, they're not fearful of the passing game. and even the running game now is following in large part to that. You can talk about the balanced attack and Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, and there have been some rumblings here and there that one of them or both of them might not be very happy right now. And I hope that's not the case, but I don't know if that's frustration with the way the offense is playing or what. This is supposed to be one of the best lines the Penn State has had under James Franklin, and we haven't really seen them do much of anything. And I think a lot of that is because of the way the offense has been called. And you got to you can ride the hot hand, you can do this, you can do that, but if it's just not working, it's just not working. And I think kudos to James Franklin for being aggressive. I think that is exactly what's needed. And really, it's not like they've lost recruits because of this. And Drew Aller, I think, was more mentioned, Davey O'Brien than he did, or Danny O'Brien, I should say, than Drew Aller. I'm sorry, Mike Yurcich. But that's one of those things that you don't know what you got until it's gone, so to speak. And people have talked about who to get for offensive coordinator. Joe Brady ends up as the interim offensive coordinator up in Buffalo because they fired Ken Dorsey for some reason. First of all, shout out Ken Dorsey. I love Ken Dorsey. He was one of my favorite players growing up for the U. I don't know if you're old enough to remember the U when they were good in the early 2000s, Kevin, because you're still a young pup, aren't you?
I was not familiar with it.
Oh, come on.
I do not recall their prowess.
But the guy that I love was Ken Dorsey. Like he was that guy for them, and I don't know why they did that in Buffalo, but that's Sean McDermott's fault. So that takes Joe Brady out until at least I think January or February. So that's an issue. I've heard Joe Moorhead's in play. I don't know if that's a great reunion. Brennan Marion is my dark horse guy from UNLV, and I think selfishly, I think that'd be hilarious because he was at Pitt and did really good things with Jordan Addison when he was there. But he's out at UNLV and he's doing a great job out there with their offense. But James Franklin says he's prepared for this. Whether it's, maybe it is, maybe he does promote from within this time. Promoting from within worked out for Ricky Ronnie. I would go back to that offense any day compared to what we're going through. As far as that, same thing with Brent Pry. He promoted Brent Pry from within, and that worked out pretty damn well. But of course, going back to Manny Diaz, you knocked the ball out of the park with Manny, both in the hiring of him and then just the overall performance. The Penn State defense is elite. And so now you don't get that complimentary football, and that's an issue. And James Franklin mentioned this after practice on Wednesday. He wants a head coach of the offense, a head coach of the defense, a head coach of special teams. That's how it's always been. That's how he's always done it, and he oversees it all. But offensively, maybe he does have to finally step up and do a little bit more as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, and I have a column that might be coming out soon. I think whoever Franklin hires next is his last offensive coordinator at Penn State. I think it's come down to his next one will be his 7th or his 6th. And this is put up or shut up. And I don't think this needs to be a national offensive coordinator search. I think you've gone outside the last 2 times. It's not worked out. Soraka, because Yurcich became available, who was the chosen one. And you already have a guy in-house that you know. You mentioned Joe Moorhead and Ricky Ronnie. Well, Jaywan Seider's first year on the staff is 2018. What's 2018? That's the first year of Ricky Ronnie. And where did Ricky Ronnie learn his offense? Joe Moorhead. Mm-hmm. So why bring back Joe Moorhead? Joe Brady, he was there in 2018 as well. I believe he was 2018, or if not, he was 2016. And there's some overlap there because, there's pictures of Joe Brady and Trace McSorley in the locker room together because Joe Brady was on that staff under Moorhead and Ronnie.
Yeah, he was the GA.
So you have this cohesion of where you had success. So I think Seider and Howle have 2 weeks to prove themselves. And Seider already has the AHC title. He's already assistant head coach. You want your head coach of your offense. You already have a guy on staff who you've promoted offensive coordinator who is the associate head coach. So I like Seider. I think it's a great opportunity for him. I think it's a great opportunity for the program. You go back to an offense that has had success, and you have to take care of Drew Aller. Nick Singleton and Katron Allen are frustrated. You mentioned it. Why? Because the defenses they're not threatened by him. Why? Because Yurcich just runs them. Katron Allen and Nick Singleton in the back of the offensive line, they can't get success. He doesn't trust Drew Aller. He didn't trust Drew Aller to throw. He has only had that one 300-yard passing game. Penn State's offense against a real opponent has only had greater than, I think, 408 yards one time, which was West Virginia. They had 450 or 470, 480 or something like that. They hit 400 twice against, I believe, Maryland and somebody else. And then the other one was Delaware. So they've hit 400 four times. But West Virginia and Delaware are at the higher end of that spectrum because they didn't have these tendencies. Yurcich is prone to these tendencies, running 60% on first down. He ran 12 times in a row against Michigan to start. And what happened? Michigan sucked down into the box, and you can't run against that front. And then Michigan, because they were selling out to stop the run, were bringing pressure because how do you beat Katron Allen and Nick Singleton? You beat them to the point of attack so they can't make you miss, so they can't get fast. They can't get their speed up. None of that stuff can happen if Drew Aller's not successful. If Drew Aller's not throwing for 300 yards and stretching the defense, using the middle of the field, crossing patterns that are confusing linebackers, confusing safeties. If you start getting linebackers dropping into pass coverage 7-8 yards off the line of scrimmage, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen have 4 or 5 yards to get going. They can get 2 yards downfield before hitting contact. They're getting hit in the backfield every play. There's very few times where they've gotten loose and they've been like one shoestring tackle away from hitting the big one. That was not happening under Yurcich. Seider knows that. Seider, hopefully, he's been working with them. He understands their frustrations, and he's going to understand how to get the best out of Drew Aller because you have Danny O'Brien, who's plugged into Aller. He's plugged into Coach Franklin because he played under him. And it sounds like Aller had a better relationship with Danny O.B. than he did with Yurcich, and Yurcich is the one who recruited him. So I think you stick with Seider. I don't think this needs to be a national coaching search. We can probably talk about it in the offseason if they end up opening up a national coaching search, but I really like where this is going with Seider. What it's going to look like, I have no idea. But I think what it'll look like is what we saw from 2016 to 2019, which was a successful offense.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing they have to do. They have to get back to what made them good, right? They got to get playmakers out in space. We talked about this on the podcast earlier this week. Everything was run to the short side, and there's just no room to go there. Everything just funnels right into one spot, and that's not how you break contain. That's not how you do that. When Drew Aller is successful, you need to get that safety back and open up that run game rather than them stack the box, 6, 7, 8 guys, and that's the issue. More so than anything, and it's funny that you mentioned J1 Seider is the guy, and I think he would be a very good candidate. But he's been a lot more vocal this year in his talking about becoming a little bit higher of something than just a running backs coach. So I think that is there's a message there, in that as well, and I think he can do it. I think it's well deserved. He's definitely paid his dues. But it'll be interesting to see really how the rest of this develops over the course of the offseason. If it even gets that far. He's a guy that's well liked, well respected, and as far as recruiting goes. He's been at Penn State since 2018, like you mentioned. Listen, Joe Moorhead is a head coach right now. He's at Akron. He has not been fired there yet. I understand that it's a MAC job, and it's tough to win in the MAC. It's tough to win at Akron. The only player that's really had success at Akron is LeBron James, and that was when he was in high school with Keith Dambrot, the head coach at Duquesne. But that's the thing. Grass isn't always greener, right? You see that in Florida, or I'm sorry, not you see that in Florida. You see that in Texas A&M, Jimbo Fisher. With him getting fired and now getting paid $76 million to sit at home and whatever Jimbo does. But this move, I think, is well needed, especially going into the Rutgers game. You still have three games really with the bowl game to see how it plays out, and I think that's the cool thing that Jawan and Nittany Howle have is they get that opportunity to see how this plays out, and that's not usually what happens. Usually when he makes that move, it's before the bowl game. And they have a new guy for the bowl game, and that's exactly the opposite now. They have 2 regular season games that should be winnable, but it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But best of luck to J1 Seider and Ty Howle. I think they're Ty Howle's as a Penn State guy. He's not going anywhere. I think that's good too. Um, but J1 also has developed into a Penn State guy as well. So this might be the bone that they need, but it might be a really good situation for everybody involved.
Yeah, you mentioned Joe Moorhead's not been fired yet. He's 2-9 at Akron this year, with one conference win after going, I believe, 2-10 last year. So probably not. He's not had a lot of success as a head coach. Is that reunion possible? Maybe, but J1 feels like a promote or lose kind of guy. He's ready to be an offensive coordinator. He's done wonders for the recruiting trail on for Penn State. I mean, just look at the running backs that he's brought in, and if you don't promote him to head to offensive coordinator, he's at another program somewhere else. Like, whoever gets hired at Texas A&M might bring him in as offensive coordinator. So, or whoever gets hired at Michigan State brings him in as offensive. Like, if you don't promote Seider to offensive coordinator, I think he's gone. So, it's going to be James. Do you want to keep him or not? I feel like it's where it is, and it's not to give him a vendetta or nothing, but
it's a really weird dynamic. I do agree. Now, with that said, whoever brings him in, I know we're running a little bit long here in this segment, but the for J1, we don't really know what his offensive identity is. They've had so much change and turnover in that department. He is the lone guy that's been there since pre-2020. Obviously Troutwine is the next in line, but you have Marcus Hagen's there now. Ty Howle has now been there a couple of years, but yeah, he's been the steady. He and Troutwine have been the steady eddies for a long time. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. And we'll be the first chance to see it against Rutgers Saturday at noon. But we'll talk a little bit more about Rutgers and what to expect against Greg Schiano. We come back from this break on the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. Welcome back to the second segment of the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. He's Kevin. I'm Jarrod. Kevin, Senior Day is a weird occasion now. And I don't mean that because it's weird because it's happening. It's weird because we don't really know who it's going to involve. Most players that are at this age have or eligible to graduate have a COVID year. They don't necessarily know if they're going to take it or not. Perfect example is Caden Wallace. He would have an extra COVID year if he would want to take it. I don't know how good that would do him. But again, that's something that we deal with now for Senior Day. So we're not really sure who we could see for the final time playing at Beaver Stadium on Saturday. But it is, in fact, Senior Day, albeit a little bit weirder of a version now thanks to some of these COVID rules.
Yeah, I think the only guarantee there is Keaton Ellis. It's his fifth year. He's done. Local kid, Franklin was talking about him going to preschool on Penn State's campus. His dad worked at the university. It's going to be sad to see him go. And it's just a great leader on the defense. His role is kind of diminished this year with the emergence of KJ Winston. And I mean, he's not really outward facing. He's not a really big, loud and vocal guy, but it seems like he's just handled it with grace and class. And he's like, you know what? KJ Winston is balling out, and my role is going to diminish. And, best of luck to him in his future. I'm pretty sure, I think he's getting his master's degree and he graduated preschool from Penn State. So this will be his third time graduating from the campus. So congratulations to him. A great year, great career. He was the embodiment of just a Central PA kid, just fulfilling his dream, going to Penn State. And another guy who's going to be his last home game is Olu Fashanu. And, he's probably going to be a top 5 NFL draft pick. So he was one of the ones who could have gone last year as a top 10 pick and was like, you know what, let's go try to win a natty. And unfortunately, as things we mentioned in the first segment, didn't happen. So.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Kevin. You mentioned Keaton Ellis. I was fortunate enough to coach against him when he was in high school, so definitely glad he graduated. But he was fun to watch. He was an electric player for State High, and it takes a lot for me to compliment somebody from State High. That's obviously Altoona's biggest rival. But the biggest thing for him is, he came in and played significant minutes. He got some significant reps. For most of his career, and I think that's very impressive for him. I don't quite know what the rest of his career looks like, but again, kudos to him, and kudos to some of those other guys that you're going to be seeing for the final time, though it hasn't necessarily been finalized. I think we'll find that out really on Sunday, or I'm sorry, on Saturday, when they line up and do the senior day ceremonies. But again, it's Rutgers, it's Greg Schiano. Greg Schiano typically plays tough football. He has some Penn State ties. I believe he was a GA here at Penn State early in his career. But Schiano has made Rutgers relevant again, now for the second time. And kudos to him for that. They got shut out by Iowa last week. But Iowa's good. We give Iowa a bunch of shit. Now, don't get me wrong, the Big Ten West is hot garbage outside of Iowa. But man, we give Iowa so much crap for their lack of offense. But they're still an 8-2 team. That's what's crazy to me. They're going to play in a really good bowl game. They're going to go to the Big Ten championship game. But we give crap to Iowa all the time, and yet here they are. But for Rutgers, come in and they get a chance to play spoiler. I don't necessarily think this is going to be a good game. The spread is in the 20s. So for Penn State, though, there's so much at stake. And I don't even mean a win. This is just building confidence in your offense, getting through the firing of a coordinator mid-season, which I don't know that's ever happened at Penn State, dating back to Paterno. Actually, Paterno was the last person that was fired mid-season. Now, obviously, far different circumstances, but and prior to that, I don't know that it happened, if at all. So, I mean, for Penn State, there's still a lot at stake.
Yeah, and it's quieting the haters too, right? The Fire Franklin crowd is out in full force. Half of my friends pretty much all of my friends are totally out on Franklin. They think Yurcich was scapegoated, and it's just Franklin needs to be gone. Like Jimbo Fisher can get canned with a $75 million buyout. Why can't James Franklin? And it's like, well, Penn State doesn't have the oil money that Texas A&M has, and nor are they.
Boosters paid the first $19 million of that.
Yeah, well, the boosters raised $160 million to Texas A&M to get him out and to find the next one. So that kind of rules out James Franklin as going to Texas A&M. Sorry, everybody who wants to see him gone because they paid $75 million there. Then they have to pay another $75 million to get Franklin out of his contract, and then pay him $10 million for the first year. So that ain't happening. So sorry, everyone who wants to see him gone. It's you hire Seider or you promote Seider, you promote Howle. How does the offense look? If the offense comes out and looks like a stud, granted, it is Rutgers. Like I told Joe and told you on Sunday, like you will be able to tell if this offense is different. If this offense looks like it did against West Virginia, if they put up Delaware type numbers against this Rutgers defense, that's saying something. It will feel different. It'll look different. And maybe you quiet the crowd because James Franklin's had a hell of a week. It has been a noisy week on social media. And Rutgers, they have 4 losses this year. It's Ohio State, Michigan. They lost to Wisconsin and the aforementioned Iowa. So it's time to hand Rutgers that 5th loss. Greg Schiano somehow got them bowl eligible,
and that's the thing, we mentioned, I know I mentioned the first segment about the grass isn't always greener. At the end of the day, Penn State is still 8-2. They are number 12 in the college football playoff. That's a New Year's Six game. They're looking at going probably to the Peach Bowl, which I am all for. I would love to go to Atlanta. I have an interview coming out with the CEO and president of the Peach Bowl sometime later this week when I finally get a chance to write it. But the biggest thing is there's so much discourse about James Franklin, good, bad, and different. But the biggest thing for me is he getting the job done? And there are only 2 teams, and that's I think the issue. He's not getting the job done against 2 teams, and that's what sucks. That's what ultimately you're measured by. It's the wins and losses against Michigan and Ohio State. And I'm going to tell you what, Penn State legend LeVar Arrington said it best. He's like, Joe didn't win against them either. So they're competing with these elite teams year after year after year. They're in what would be the college football playoff if it was expanded year after year after year. But for whatever reason, we are viewing James Franklin as and this is kind of the product of the college football playoff. It's playoff or bust, and that's tough. That's really tough at Penn State and tough at everywhere, right? Especially when the 2 other teams that you're losing are not only just in your conference, but they're also in your division, and that is tough too. But the thing about it is they're going to win. They should win 10 games this year, if not 11 games with the bowl game. because they'll get an at-large team if they play in the Peach Bowl, so they'll probably get maybe a Group of 5 team, or an Alabama if they
They
don't make
could
the
get
playoff.
Alabama.
Right. I mean, but that's the other thing too. It's like you take it with a grain of salt. Yeah, like the losses to Ohio State and Michigan sting, and they suck, and it's awful. But at the end of the day, 10-2 is still not bad. There are only 11 other teams that wish they had it better right now than Penn State. And those are the teams in front of them. Everybody else would love to be in Penn State's situation. They'd love to be at those in those moments. But at the end of the day, does Franklin deserve to be fired? No, I don't think he does. Did Yurcich? Yeah, I've watched that offense. I've watched a lot of high school football too, and there are some high school football game plans that were a hell of a lot better than whatever Yurcich drew up or failed to stick to. But for James Franklin, everything that he's doing, I think, is good. It just so happens that they're just not winning against the teams that they want to win against. The Michigans, the Ohio States, they're taking care of business against every other team, and unfortunately, when you have two teams that are playing the best football in their program's history, right? I mean, we can't forget about that. That seems to be the issue. But for Franklin, there's so much, and I get it from my friend group too. It's why Franklin should be fired. Listen, who can you go out and get that's going to do a better job? Who can go out and beat Ohio State and Michigan with regularity? Because Ohio State's not beating Michigan with regularity. So that's
and Michigan's not winning bowl games.
Right. Yeah, they don't have a month to scout. And we'll talk a little bit more about our best friend Connor Stallions when we in the third segment. But yeah, I mean that's what's tough. It takes away from talking about Rutgers. James Franklin said his little quip. I'd really like to talk about Rutgers, but let's be real. This is the dominant story. But for Franklin, I don't think his seat is hot. I really don't. I think it's lukewarm at best, and that's probably just because it's cold out. It's just an automatic car heater. But the thing is, you do have to beat those teams. Before Stallions, he was beating Michigan State every so often. Or I'm sorry, Michigan. Well, definitely Michigan State, but definitely Michigan as well. So it's tough, right? I get the outrage. But man, the offense was embarrassing under Yurcich, and that shouldn't happen at Penn State. That's inexcusable. But I think you also have to look at yourself in the mirror if you're Penn State and figure out what kind of program you are. Are you that 4-8 every year? Are you for that 4-12, or are you that top 4? And right now they're just not doing enough to be in the top 4. But at the same time, I don't think that warrants the firing of James Franklin.
No, and if you're listening to this and you're kind of writing us off as Franklin apologist, believe me, the group chat, the text messages that fly back and forth between Jarrod and I, or the group chat between the three of us with Joe, they light up when Penn State's losing to Ohio State. They light up when Penn State's losing to Michigan. We hate recording this shit. Like, we hate when they lose because it is not fun to be angry. It gets me up. It keeps me going at night. Like, I can't sleep. I have the urge to write 2,000-word columns that end up getting trimmed down. Like, it is not fun. But we're also not recording lost podcasts against Maryland, against Northwestern, against Indiana, Iowa. We're not recording those losses. Why? Because they're not happening. If you look at every other program, they're dropping these games against. They're good this year, but they're dropping games against Missouri and Kentucky, and when Tennessee's irrelevant, all these SEC programs are doing that, and Alabama's getting upset by Texas A&M at home, who's an underdog with Johnny Manziel. You know what I mean? Like, yes, Franklin's losing to Ohio State, Michigan, but they're 6, 7, 8 point underdogs in those games. Do I wish that spread was 2.5? Do I wish Penn State got favored in some of those games? They were good enough to be favored in some of those games. Of course I do. It's just this year they didn't have a competent offense. If you even have 10 more or 5 more first downs against Ohio State, you win. If you don't have a 20-yard penalty that's bogus against Michigan, you're in the game and you didn't chase points early. It's a field goal game. And Penn State can score a touchdown. They've not shown it this year. They can score a 75-yard touchdown like they did against West Virginia. Like, Penn State is so close. It's just the razor-thin margins of the college football playoff, the 4-team playoff. You're playing against teams who have been in it the last two teams who have been in it the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else has that on their schedule. Alabama doesn't play Georgia every year because they're in the other side of the conference. The Pac-12, look at what happened. The Pac-12 is purely imploded. We're 30 minutes into a pregame Rutgers podcast. We're not even into the third segment because we're talking about still a loss against Michigan. Like, we don't enjoy this at all. Like, this is terrible. This is where we are. And what does it look like without James Franklin? It probably looks like early James Franklin when he is losing to Maryland or Rutgers or Northwestern or Michigan State after a thunderstorm delay when Michigan State does no business winning the football game. You know what I mean? It's 41-point blowouts on the road in Ann Arbor. Like, this thing could get ugly because when James Franklin leaves, so does the rest of his coaching staff. And when the rest of his coaching staff leave, so does all those high-profile recruits. The grass may look green, but it's going to look like Zoysia in the winter, man. That's just going to be brown for a few years.
And that's the thing with Pat Kraft. You know, he's not afraid to make those decisions. He's not afraid to spend money. He's got rid of his. Rob Cooper stepped down. Shrewsbury went to Notre Dame. And we'll talk about this in the third segment because I was at Penn State's game against St. Francis on Wednesday night. But they hired Mike Rhodes, and he's not afraid to go out and get his guy. You know, he went out and got a guy on an alum at Boston College to coach the baseball team. And that's it. And playing baseball in the North is not an easy thing to do. But the thing is, you got to win those games, and that matters. And I apologize for my dogs going off in the background. They're obviously not happy that I keep talking about Michigan either. But we're going to talk a lot more about some other things around the Big Ten and around James Franklin here in the third and final segment of the Lashing Out podcast when we come back from this break. Welcome back to the third and final segment of the Lashing Out podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. I'm Jarrod. He's Kevin. Kevin, I want to get away from basketball a little bit. I was at Penn State's game against St. Francis. I cover St. Francis basketball for the Altoona Mirror, and I was fortunate enough to go up to the game. First of all, it was crazy. I didn't get up there until late to be able to see the game. I had some prior commitments that I couldn't really get out of. But at the end of the day, I was able to get there. But the biggest thing that I was there for was it was one of the coolest experiences to see the coaches talk after the game. Typically, you get some word soup, right? You get a bunch of words that don't really make sense that are tell you nothing. But Rob Krimmel at St. Francis, who's a good friend of mine, and Mike Rhodes at Penn State both had some really great insight on a multitude of different things. Mike Rhodes took the time out of his press conference to stop, say, hey, I think it's really impressive, all the student journalists that we have here. Whenever you say your name and want to ask a question, when you raise your hand, say your name in your year and what you do. And I thought that was really cool. You don't see that perspective from coaches. I get this Penn State basketball. Penn State basketball media coverage is completely different than Penn State football. Don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, being able to take that out and talk about the bigger picture and talk about that's a really cool thing, on both sides. And on the St. Francis side, Coach Krimmel mentioned like his team becoming like a flower, and you reap what you sow. And I think having those types of perspectives is hugely valuable in college football. It is still a game. In college basketball and college football, but it's still a game at the end of the day. These people are humans. And I think that the human nature, we often forget about that, especially when it comes to football. And we're seeing that so much now on social media, everywhere you turn. But, that's just one of those things that you get that little bit more intricate access and intimate access in a sport like that, rather than James Franklin saying, man, I wish we would talk about Rutgers. But we're talking about the rest of college football.
Actually, we still got more to talk about Rutgers.
More Rutgers.
Last bit.
But I'm not James Franklin.
Last bit. All right. Saturday, 45-32 a.m. clouds with some p.m. sun. Penn State has a 20.5-point favorite with an over-under of 42.5.
Educator Day, by the way.
Educator Day and Senior Day.
That's right.
As we talked about earlier. Mr. Prugar, a final score prediction for you.
That's one of those situations where I've had Penn State over 40 in every game but two. So I'm going to keep that going. I'm going to say 48, 49, 49-10 Penn State.
All right. I kind of dug myself in a hole on Sunday by throwing out a random score, and I'm going to stick to my guns. 45-7 Penn State. So we're both on the over. I think this offense is going to be electric on Saturday. Electric.
It needs to be. It absolutely. They need to come out firing. And if they don't, that's not great.
Yeah. So, rest of college football. The freaking Florida State Seminoles are still the fourth-ranked team in this country. But honestly, they could be the sixth-ranked team in this country. I don't care. They have played zero opponents. How is Washington not the fourth-ranked team in the country? Finally, Florida State doesn't have first-place votes. Finally, they don't have first-place votes. But Washington, they've got wins versus Oregon, USC, Utah. They're at Oregon State. If they don't jump Florida State this week after playing Oregon State, and Florida State has freaking North Alabama, the shit's rigged. And it's ESPN doing it.
Yeah. They got North Alabama, and then they've got Florida, which is a good one. And then they'll be in the ACC championship game against I'm not quite sure who.
Louisville, I think.
So they got some challenges coming up. I think Florida would be a tough matchup, but the Pac-12 is going to figure itself out. This week USC's got UCLA. USC is just going to have to be a spoiler. Washington's got Oregon State. That's a tough matchup. Oregon's got Arizona State. And then next week, Oregon State, and then it looks like Washington had. Oh, they got the Apple Cup. How did I lose that? So, and then they've got their Pac-12 championship. So there's a lot that can happen. There's a lot that's going to happen. So it'll be interesting to see. But college football is wild, man. It's the wild, wild west in a lot of different ways. We mentioned our boy Connor Stallions. The AP did a Freedom of Information Act release for his expenses while he was at Michigan, and there were no expenses. As a recruiting analyst, he did not turn any receipts in. This is the guy that's making $55,000, so that's another red flag yet again. Not if you ask Michigan fans, of course. That means everybody was innocent. He was just doing it on his own recognizance. I've struggled with money. I'm not going to lie. I've made less than $55,000 every stop of my life, except save for when I was teaching and working for DK. But I don't know his family situation, and I saw the reviews for his vacuum repair business, so I'm pretty sure he wasn't making any money there either. I
think he was losing money there.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of shit, man. I don't quite get it. I don't quite understand it. But at the end of the day, there are a couple different ways this can unfold, and I think that's, I think it's a one of four thing. There are four different situations I think that you can look into for this. Who paid for the tickets? Is it? I don't think it was him. That's option number one. I do not think that was him. I just can't imagine for the life of me those tickets at the 45-yard line, 6 rows or however many rows up at every big stadium in the Big Ten. No chance you can afford that on a $55,000 salary unless he's got an incredible sugar mama, and I think that would be great. I think that would be a whole nother loop into this saga that we weren't expecting. And honestly, who the hell knows? But I also think that the next step is, who else could it be? Is it Harbaugh? And they're paying for it like out of pocket, just cash from camps, and he gets reimbursed that way. That could be an option. Summer camps, are operated through third-party LLCs. Is he getting paid through that? And there's so much money there. A coach paid him directly. A booster paid him directly. If it's any of those four or any of those three options, Michigan is going to get absolutely wrecked by the sanctions or by the NCAA. And they deserve every ounce of it.
Yeah, I think no matter the level, you should at least create some expense reports. Oh yeah, he bought a recruited cheeseburger. Um, sorry, I had to take a dig at the earlier recruiting violations that Michigan was in. Uh,
That's right.
but like, you need a Burger King receipt. You need an enterprise
Yeah,
receipt.
yeah.
You need a
How are you a
hotel
recruiting
stay.
analyst and not on the when you're not on the road and
Yeah,
getting money?
it's there's got to be some, and I think Michigan's kind of played themselves with him having none. So yeah, this could be quite sticky, and they didn't want to create a paper trail, and they've clearly gone to great extents to not create a paper trail. The problem is when it looks too clean, uh, you get busted even faster than if it looks really freaking sloppy. You know what I mean? If it's really sloppy, it's accounting errors. Oh, it's he had the wrong credit card, like all this other stuff. Like you can kind of play that off as ignorant. But if you have a guy who's a recruiting analyst who's out on the road every freaking week, going to high school football games and getting all this tape and doing everything that there is with that, man, you gotta have some. You gotta have something because if it's super clean, jeez, like
Squeaky clean is not good either. Sorry for that. There was a brief interruption where I was petting my dogs, giving my dogs attention. Um, Kevin's met them; he knows them very well. But they were hanging out and wrestling over a toy on my lap. But yeah, so the other thing too that we haven't really looked into is CMU still hasn't given us an answer or given anybody an answer about Connor Science being on their sideline. This is not that hard, but I guarantee they're waiting to see how the hammer drops on Michigan. And as part of that NCAA investigation, that's when that will come out. But there's just so much every day. It seems like something new is going to be released, and Friday is really is the day. All this information is going to become public. The budgets, all of this, during the discovery process of this, and I don't think Michigan wants that. Because this is only going to hurt their case, in my opinion.
yeah, and they wanted I forget the one judge who they wanted, who was the professor at the
He's just a law
university.
professor. Yeah, this one's at least an alum.
And this one
She's
did
gone against them before. She has gone against Michigan.
she did go against them, but she graduated from Michigan, but she's not affiliated with Michigan anymore. So they were hoping for one judge who was hopefully going to be favor and not fully open the can of worms. But it sounds like they're going to get the guy. They're going to get the judge, the lady. I'm sorry for forgetting her name, but it sounds like she's going to open the full can of worms, and respectfully so. And this is probably not the last lawsuit because the NCAA is still to go, and that's probably going to be done in Chicago. And that one, there are people in Chicago who have nothing to do with Michigan and probably absolutely despise it because they're Northwestern law graduates. So this could get really sticky. But if we're going to talk about other programs, can I go back to some of the games from this weekend?
Yes, actually, before we do that, I know we're going to wrap up here. I know we've gone a little bit longer than we expected, but what I want to talk about is Northwestern. They are about to become bowl eligible. They are 5-5. Given what they went through at the beginning of the year, I think what they've done has been super impressive. I'm looking at Northwestern football currently to see their schedule. David Braun also has been named the interim tag has been taken off, and that is so well deserved. We're hard on coaches, but man, he walked into a tough situation and walked out, with 5 wins, if not more, this year. They've got Purdue at home and on the road at Illinois. They could end up becoming bowl eligible, and I think that's incredible for the Northwestern Wildcats. And the Big Ten as a whole, that was a tough situation to walk into. Pat Fitzgerald was beloved, I think, throughout the Northwestern community. But man, kudos to him and the job that they've done. But yes, let's talk a little bit more about games now that we're done being sidetracked around the shit show that is the Big Ten.
Yeah, David Braun, what a great showing. I mean, that's a program that I thought was going to go 1-11 this year, and to potentially even get close being bowl eligible. Kind of shows you how in disarray Pat Fitzgerald had the Northwestern locker room, and how David Braun was able to rally the troops really only after getting there a couple months prior. You think Alabama's going to struggle with Chattanooga this weekend?
I hope not.
Let's see. The only other things, Georgia's on the road at Tennessee. Tennessee's reeling after that loss to Mizzou. I think Georgia, it's only a 10-point game. I think
Georgia's good.
I think if you're a gambling man, you want to hit that at -20 and watch Georgia's just run away with it. Clemson kind of got their mojo back at home against North Carolina at 3:30 on ESPN.
That's going to be a
Forest.
tough game for the ACC.
Yeah. Ohio State is Minnesota, and then Kansas State, Kansas in the Sunflower Showdown. Little in-state rivalry. You gotta love that. Hopefully, Jalen Daniels is back. It doesn't seem like Jason Dean's probably going to be back. He took a wicked injury last week. I'm really circling that game. And then the number one game that I want to see is Utah, Arizona. Unfortunately, it's at Arizona, but unfortunately, that game is pigeonholed to the Pac-12 network, which on the East Coast is rather challenging for us to see. I think I might actually have to legitimately try to see how I can get Pac-12 network.
Just to watch Notre Dame.
Utah, Arizona, man.
That's right. Oh, Notre Dame's on Pac-12 network, and I think that is absolutely hilarious.
2:30 p.m. Eastern that'll be like 11:30 a.m. kick for them. But Arizona, Utah, it's only a 1-point game right now, and both of those teams are really good. They probably could be ranked a little bit higher than what they are.
My apologies. Notre Dame, that's not until next week that Notre Dame is on Pac-12 network, which is still very funny either way.
But
yeah, that's a great game. Utah is a fun team to watch. I know they're kind of falling off, but I think that ultimately, they're still a good team. Kyle Whittingham's a great coach.
Arizona's my favorite team that's not named Penn State this year, so
that's fair. FSU is going to get most likely Louisville in the ACC championship game.
Yes. Louisville is still undefeated. No, they lost to Pitt. No.
Yes, that's that is definitely a thing that happened. But no, it's going to be wild. This is one of those bizarre weeks. The SEC is essentially off this week, and a couple other teams too. But Penn State's got Rutgers. This is their get right game. And then the Big Ten, they got two trap games. You've got Ohio State, and then you've also got Ohio State's got Minnesota, and Michigan's got Maryland. So those are a trap game because that game in it's at the Big House this year. Oh God, that's going to be, I think, one of the most epic matchups we've seen in quite some time. Luckily for us, Penn State plays Friday night that weekend. They play on Black Friday at Ford Field against Michigan State for the prestigious Land-Grant Trophy. So I cannot wait to preview the Land-Grant Trophy. I think that's going to be on the image. We have that opportunity to have that image up throughout the broadcast, and I think we're going to do it next week.
Your uncle made it, so we get copyright rights, right?
Huh?
I said,
everybody's uncle made it. It's got a piece of everybody. But, that's all we've got for today. Kevin, any party shots?
Nope. Go 1-0 against Rutgers, baby. 1-0.
Yes, right. Get back in that win column. Get right. I would like to thank my dogs, Lincecum and Posey, for popping on the podcast today. Special guests for Kevin Quigley. This has been Jarrod Prugar on the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. You can catch us on YouTube and anywhere you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, you name it, we're on it. Please rate, review, give us a lot of different reviews that are good, all positive. The power of positivity, right, Kevin?
Yeah, 5 stars only. We delete anything that's less.
That's right.
Just kidding. Spotify doesn't let us do that. They don't let us do that. They all are 5 stars at this point in time. So thank you for that.
Yes. But for Kevin, this has been Jarrod. We thank you as always for listening, and we'll catch you again later this